Hi everyone, welcome to this month's Patron's Choice video with the topic of early signs of Asperger's. So if you're new to this blog, my name is Paul and I am currently 33. I discovered I'm on the spectrum about 3 years ago now. You can check out my diagnosis story video if you're interested to hear more about that. So when I walked into the psychologist's office, apparently my autism was obvious within the first 30 seconds or so. So how was it obvious? These days it's common to diagnose autism as early as preschool or even younger. So surely looking back over my life at that age, there must have been some signs for me too. So this video is not a list of early warning signs or anything like that, and it's definitely not intended to be used for diagnosis. Instead, it's actually something a lot more valuable. It's the story of one person and how all of these seemingly unrelated little peculiarities that you'd think every child has, when you put it all together, makes a completely different picture. So I've broken it up into 4 sections. So we've got sensory sensitivities, uncommon interests, my learning styles, and then finally how all of these led to an array of social challenges. And for each of these, I'll be telling a couple of short stories to get a sense of what I was like at the time. So this is by no means an exhaustive list of all of the early signs of Asperger's for me, but hopefully it'll give you a sense of what I was like in those early years. So to start off with, sensory issues were probably the easiest thing that others could see from the outside. So I was clearly very sensitive to smell and noise and touch. And certain textures. So this is me at the beach as a baby trying my very best to avoid touching the sand. So I used to be kind of proud of this superpower of being able to hear things that other people couldn't hear, specifically higher frequencies. But actually in real life, it's not so much that I could hear it, it's more that above a certain frequency, I stopped hearing the sound and I started just feeling pain. So a good example of this is squeaky brakes in a car, for example. There are some frequencies in the audible range that we can hear, but then it comes along with some higher that actually just cause pain. I remember one time at a birthday party, I must have been maybe 7 years old, and I drank half a can of fizzy drink. I was so proud of myself because previously even the tiniest sip was massively overstimulating for my lips. So being able to sit there and slowly sip it and get all the bubbles out and get through half a can was like the highlight of my whole day. I also had some strange food sensitivities. For example, I couldn't stand the taste of rice, like plain rice by itself, but at the same time I would eat lemons when I was really young. Apparently one of my first words was more, as in, please give me another slice of lemon to eat. So sure, that's a little strange, I guess, but don't all kids have funny eating habits? How is this any different? So in terms of my interests as a kid, they probably seem quite stereotypical on the outside. I mean, I was really into dinosaurs and outer space and things like that. Pretty common, right? The only thing is I took these to a bit of an extreme. I mean, I was writing out tables and listing the distance from each planet from the sun and how long it took them to orbit and how long they would take to spin on their own axis and things like this. I remember a time when I was I probably would have been about 7 or 8, and I was chatting to a friend at school, and in those days we were taught 9 planets, you know, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. Right? Pluto being the furthest one out. And so I was having a discussion with this kid at school and I was trying to tell him that Pluto has an elliptical orbit, which means at the moment it's closer to the sun than Neptune is. And he wasn't having a bar of it. He said, no, Neptune is closer to the sun and then Pluto's further away. So anyway, we ended up making a bet, for lack of a better word, and I said, look, I can prove this. I've got a book at home. I'll bring it in. I'll show you. So I did, and I brought it in and I showed him, and he just didn't listen and didn't care, and he didn't follow through with the what we bet on. I think he was going to give me a book or something small like that. So that feels like a really stereotypical scenario for me, and I really hate being right. I feel like if I know something is true, it's because it's my special interest and I've researched it to death. And when other people don't listen or don't care, it can be really difficult. Another example of getting slightly obsessed with something is one day I learned about different paper sizes like A4, A5, B4, etc. So I went home and I made all of them, like gluing pieces of paper together and putting them all together and cutting them out and folding them. And so that's the kind of stuff I was interested in, really, really structured stuff. Another interesting thing is my playing style. So in hindsight, I was always more interested in the physical properties of toys than what they were supposed to represent. I once had a baby's toy that I played with until I was quite old, and it was a weighted ball that I would just spin it around and watch how the angular momentum worked, right? So this ball was supposed to be for like a 2-month-old baby, and here I was at the age of like 10 still playing with it because it was cool and it had a funny weight to it. And in a similar way, when I was playing with things like Matchbox cars, I would just smash them into each other and watch them bounce off and see which one could flip the other one. So that's not really using them as cars. I wasn't holding it in my hand pretending this was a car going down the road, vroom vroom, oh this is a fire truck, it's going to go put out a fire. I was like, oh this is a fire truck, it's going to slam into a school bus and see which one flips over or not. So it was very creative, but it was almost like I was creating an imaginary world that was a lot more interesting than the real world. So when I was 5 years old, I changed schools halfway through the year in my first year of school. So interestingly, I just discovered this now, but on my report card from that first school, it said that I had a learning disability. So on the same report card, it said, Paul is a high achiever in all areas of the prep curriculum. And then later it says, Paul has a learning problem which is quite noticeable in the classroom. With background noise, he is often oblivious to any statement made to him. Now, in hindsight, that explains a lot, because so often my experience of primary school was asking the question, how do people know what's going on? How do you know what homework we have to do? How do you know where to line up? How do you know what we're supposed to be doing right now? Because I would get distracted by something and I literally wouldn't hear what the teacher was trying to say. Apart from this though, my experience of school was that it was mind-numbingly boring. I remember coming home from school one day, I was probably 6 or 7, and saying, hey mum, did you realize that some people actually find school difficult? Like, this was blowing my mind. I just assumed that everyone else was having a similar experience to me. It's just that I was having such a different experience to all the others in my classroom that it put me on the outer when I was trying to understand them. So to combat this boredom, I had a habit of trying to find the most creative answer to a question that I could think of that was still a correct answer. So if the teacher was saying, can you please name all these animals? I would say something like, okay, well, so this one's Lucy and this one's Harry and this one's, instead of like dog, cow, sheep, whatever. So this kind of creativity, for lack of a better word, was getting me in trouble sometimes at school. I remember one day in grade 3 and we were learning how to cut shapes in half, right? So what we were supposed to do is cut them in half, like this. Wow, incredibly boring. So what I decided to do instead is look for another answer. How else could I cut this shape in half other than just drawing a line through the middle? So I thought, well, I could do this, right? I could cut it like this, so long as this length is the same as this length. I thought that was a perfectly valid answer. But apparently, no, what I should have done, clearly, was gone from corner to corner like this. So as you can see, at school, I was typically a frustrated, bored child. So another story that I remember is from kindergarten, and we were learning about shapes. So you can imagine we're all sitting on the floor and she holds up, what's this? Triangle. What's this? Square. And then she holds up one and it's like half a circle. And I thought, oh, what's this? I know the name for this. What is it? Like semicircle. That's it, semicircle. And I was really excited, but unfortunately, due to all that thinking time, I was a little bit slow and she assumed that no one knew the answer to this. So I was completely fine with that because she was about to tell us the answer and she said, it's a half circle. And I thought, what? Are you serious? And so I can remember being 3 years old and getting really frustrated. The name for half a circle is a semicircle. Get it right. Okay, so maybe we'll leave it there for today. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've enjoyed these pictures. These have been Just a handful of little anecdotes from my childhood that will hopefully give you a little bit of a sense of what I was like back then and some of the things that I was struggling with and some of the early signs that I was on the autism spectrum.